Okay, by show of hands, how many people brought rotten tomatoes with them today? Okay, great. I'm going to tell you a really bad joke. So 2 fish are sitting next to each other in the tank, and the one fish looks over to the other and goes, "Do you know how to drive this thing?"
That's one of your best times.
For those of you that might be new, we're known for our bad dad jokes. Don't forget to scroll down in our MML newsletter for a great bad dad joke every month. You'll just get a kick out of them. Coincidentally, my wife gave me a book for Father's Day of about 280 bad dad jokes, so you're all in trouble. All right, so we have a fantastic speaker today. But before we get on to Jackie, I want to make sure that we thank all of our sponsors. So I've seen most of you in the room today. If you could stand up or raise your hand when I call your name, please. These are the folks that are responsible for the room you're in, the heat you're feeling, the water you're drinking, the coffee you're drinking, the bagels, the live stream, the video, the speaker, everything. If it weren't for them, we wouldn't be here today. So first, Mike from La Pata back here, standing in the maroon shirt. And next, Dave from Parkside. Where'd you go, buddy? Right here. And thanks to Dave for checking everybody in today. Lauren from Atomic is not here, but Steph is here from Atomic. We've got Jason over here running video and live stream. So Jason's from Swift Systems. Tom Gaddy from Black Twig couldn't be here, but is anybody else here from Black Twig this morning? No worries. Thanks for Tom and Black Twig. Jamie right up front as always. Thank you, Jamie. Jamie's with CMA. And then Paul from Pulcinelli. I saw you, buddy. Where are you? All the way in the back. Thank you, Paul, for being here. And then Matt Scarin. Where did you land, Matt? If you could stand up, please. Matt is one of our new sponsors this month as of just the last few weeks. So thanks for Matt for being here and joining us and helping out with everything. There is a sponsor table in the back that has all kinds of information from our sponsors. If you don't mind picking something up on the way out, just to say thanks to them. Spread the word about what they do and who they are. We would really appreciate that. Okay, on to Jackie. So Jacque James is founder and president of ARA Fraud and Forensic Services, a leading investigative forensic accounting firm that specializes in fraud prevention, white-collar fraud investigations, and litigation support. Jackie is a certified fraud examiner with over 25 years of forensic accounting, corporate investigations, and law enforcement expertise. Jackie promotes a sense of urgency among her colleagues, and team provides solutions that help protect the client's assets with profitability. Her goal is to proactively work with companies through education, awareness, and by utilizing ARA's proprietary 4-step fraud prevention strategy to reduce fraud in the workplace. She is often called upon to provide expert testimony in fraud and litigation cases. As a sought-after speaker, Jackie enjoys engaging and educating audiences on various fraud and business topics. She holds a Master's of Business Administration and Masters of Accounting and Financial Management from Keller Graduate School of Management in St. Louis. She was also an adjunct professor at Webster University, where she taught graduate level accounting. Please help me welcome Jackie. Thanks.
Yes, I need this. Good morning. Okay, does anybody else hate listening to your own bio? Just saying. All right. And also, I'm trying to get used to, I don't normally have a handheld mic, so bear with me. If anybody can't hear me because I'm not talking into this clearly, just raise your hand, throw rotten tomatoes at me or whatever. It's all good. I know how to dodge. So, first off, everybody got up this morning on this lovely day, all right, to come and hear me present. I got to say, this is the first time I've been live since 19, so this feels really good to be back in the room with everybody. So, thank you. All right, so how many of you guys commit fraud every day? Oh, wait. How many of you don't want to admit that you commit fraud every day? I got one honest guy over here. By the way, did I tell you that I read body language for a living? Just saying. All right. So, seriously, how many of you are, just to have a temperature of the room, how many of you are business Leaders, executives, owners. Okay, how many of you are advisors, consultants? Okay, good mix. Okay, so for those of you on either side of the aisle, have any of you ever had an employee fraud in your employment or your business? A few of you. Okay. All right. So hopefully this will help to make sure that that doesn't happen again. But at the same time, unfortunately, I have seen fraud repeat itself. So hopefully you're not one of those people that's going to let that happen. So, how many of you think it won't happen to me? Does that look like anybody, you know? Because I'll tell you what, folks, I hear it all the time. People say, oh, you know what, I trust my employees, it'll never happen to me, right? So, all right. So fraud is on the rise. In 2021, we had a 70% uptick, okay, in fraud cases over 20. Now, with COVID, you can imagine there's a whole lot of shenanigans going on out there with PPP loans, everything else, working from remote. So fraud is definitely on the rise. 1 out of every 3 small business is going to be a victim of fraud. Now, we're looking at companies under 100 employees. Companies over 100 employees, that number goes down a little bit, but not much. 87% of employees who commit fraud do not have a criminal background. How many of you guys actually do background checks? Okay, that's good. It's better than not doing it. Those that don't do them, you might want to consider it because you can catch some things. However, people have to actually prosecute these folks in order to have a background check. And that's what we're finding is a lot of employers don't want to deal with it. They just terminate the person and they move on. And then where do they go? They go to your neighbor who now has to deal with it. And a tip is a number one method to detect fraud. Now, why am I giving you some of these fraud facts, right? We're like, Jackie, you just sat here and said that, hey, we're going to have a lot of fun, or, you know, that was implied, and you're sitting here boring us with statistics. Well, part of the objective today for this presentation is to do this. So I'm going to take this microphone down, and now everybody has to play, right? So Simon says, do this. I didn't say take them down yet, Keith Vollmer. Put your hands up. So this is what we do every day when we go to work. We go in and we put our blinders on. Okay, now you can shake them away, right? So part of what I want to do is really kind of give you some background on fraud, and then we're going to go into some case studies today that at the end of the day, if it doesn't keep you up at night, then I didn't do my job. Okay? So how much do you think fraud costs in a business on average? And by the way, I don't talk the whole 45 minutes, gang, so I do pick on people and I want this interactive. What do you think, Tom? Per company, how much do you think if a fraud incident happens, how much does it cost?
5 million.
5 million? That's a lot. Could happen. I heard somebody over here.
I thought that was kind of high. 150,000 per incident. 75.
150,000, 75. Do I hear 500? Going once? 750? Sold. You know, it's all over the board, but here's what I will tell you. So the industry averages, so I am a certified fraud examiner. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners who I get my credentialing through, and they do a survey every 2 years. So some of the stats that we're learning or I'm sharing with you today come from that report. They say the company loses an average of 5% of their revenues to fraud when they have an incident. Now, if you're a $20 million business, that's $1 million out your door, okay? If you're $40 million, you can do the math from there. The median fraud loss, now this is median, it's not the average. The median fraud loss in manufacturing is $200,000. Here's what I'm going to tell you, folks. That $200,000, I wish I had cases that were only $200,000. Because a lot of the cases that I work are $500,000 all the way up to multi-million-dollar cases. So think about what type of vacations that could pay for you if you're a business owner. Because it's paying for someone else's vacation, just telling you right now. It's usually that employee that's taking advantage of your kind generosity to give them a place to work. Long-term employees who have been there for longer than 10 years are going to steal 3 times more. Okay? Why do you think that is?
They know the systems.
They know the systems.
They feel they've earned it.
They feel they've earned it.
They're trusted.
They're the most trusted. Raise your hand. Stand up. Stand up, Rose. Give Rose a round of applause. Thank you. It is always the most trusted employee, gang, right? We give that person the keys to the kingdom. You give them the wallet, you give them everything because you trust them. And half the time when I talk to a business owner that says that they've had a fraud, here's what happens is they'll call me and they'll talk through the scenario with me and I say, okay, great, how long has the person been there? Well, she's been here about 12 years, you know, but I really trust her, I doubt it's her. Okay, well, let's determine if it is or isn't or what's going on. And sure enough, when we come back, it's the person that's been over the owner's house, it's like their, you know, goddaughter or godmother to their daughter or son. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's almost always the most trusted person. Not saying don't trust people, but I always say trust but verify is my motto. All right, 4 internal control weaknesses that contribute to fraud. So lack of internal controls, overriding existing controls. First off, 1 and 2, in small business, we just know there's a lack of internal controls. You just don't have the manpower, I get it, right? But more times than not, we don't even put any internal controls in place, and that's where companies can falter. Overriding existing controls, well heck, people always say, Jackie, you know, where's my CPAs? Mike, what's the number one weakness for fraud, why fraud occurs? What is it? Opportunity. Okay, thank you. You didn't say what. Normally when I ask a CPA, why does fraud happen? Well, lack of internal controls, right? Keith Bomer shaking his head. I'm going to pick on you. Well, actually, yes, that's a sub-byproduct of it, but the number one weakness for fraud is the human element. Because at the end of the day, we're going to get too busy, we're going to forget to do things, or we intentionally don't want to do things that's going to allow us to perpetrate a fraud, okay? So keep that in mind. And poor tone at the top. So lack of management review is number 3, poor tone at the top. Gang, this is everything. If you're a leader in an organization, if you're the one that's going out and taking advantage of the company credit card, expect your employees to do the same thing. So keep that in mind, okay? So why do good people commit fraud? This is where you guys talk.
They get into buying and need money.
They get into buying and need money, okay? Right?
Or they see an opportunity, just falls into their lap.
They see an opportunity, so you've got opportunity, they have a motive, right? They have a perceived financial need. Anybody go through a divorce? Right? A few people, you're not willing to raise your hand? It's all right. I can look out of the corner of my eye. You know, when you go through some of these life-changing events just in general, it becomes very stressful. So people sometimes feel like their back's up against the wall. And usually what happens is a good person, because here's what I'll tell you. So back in '93, I was a police officer. I was a beach cop. I had a rough job. And yes, we did have real bullets. And no, I did not wear shorts. I wish I could have, but I didn't. Back then, I was taking people to jail every week. It was the same frequent flyer, as I call them. We were going to jail every week, okay? When I'm dealing with white-collar fraud right now, that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing good people that look like every one of us in this room, okay? That has made a choice, for whatever their reason, and went down a path. And once they went down that path, they couldn't stop. Because what happens once we start doing something? Greed kicks in, right? Or we've got some personality disorders, which we'll talk about here in a little later when we get to the characteristics of fraud. So as somebody starts going down that path, they get so far in, they can't, if they stop, they know they're going to get caught, and that's usually what happens, okay? So they keep going. So now you've taken this good person who's made some really poor choices, and now they've become a fraudster. It can happen to any one of us, okay? So this is what they call the fraud triangle. So you have to have motive, opportunity, and then a third one, which I love, because this is where when I do interviews, when I have the opportunity to actually do an interview with somebody that's committed a fraud, I love to get into people's heads and figure out why they do what they do, right? That's what's fun for me. I know I'm probably a little warped and jaded after all these years, but I like to get into understanding why somebody did what they did, and with rationalizations. Why did you rationalize, or how did you rationalize stealing $1.5 million? You know? So you'd be surprised if somebody answers I've heard. I think I've heard it all at this point, but then every now and then somebody will throw a zinger at me. So, all right. So characteristics of fraud. Profile. How many of you think more women steal than men? I love doing this. Where's my guys? I got a female that says so. Wow. The guys are too ashamed to raise their hand. You know you want to. Right? So most think more women. How many of you think more men steal than women?
Sure.
Okay. Why?
Well, first of all, there's more men in the workforce.
Okay. Studies show that, yes, that's true. However, I'm here to tell you, from my experience, most of the cases that I've worked have been all females. Not all, but most of them, females.
Really?
So I'm seeing a huge uptick in what we call pink collar fraud. So it's a real thing. Google search it. Usually the person who is committing fraud is very well respected. Okay. Autocratic, very friendly, somebody that is, again, well liked. Usually 35 to 55 years of age. 58% male, 42% female. That number, I think, is closing in as we're seeing more and more women who are also now becoming, you know, executives in companies. But also think about it, who's handling the accounting functions? Not that accounting is the only way that people steal, but that is a big aspect of it. Most of the people that have committed fraud definitely have a post-bachelor's degree. Some have master's degrees. And usually they have unlimited authority. So some of the other aspects that we look at, again, because I've been doing this for a long time, and again, you know, one of the things that fascinates me is being able to go in and understand the human psyche, why people tick, which is why I like to get into somebody's head about why they do what they do and what made them rationalize their behavior. So when you really look at, you know, some of the folks that we're dealing with, and even outside of just the fraud arena, of course, I'm not sure, there may be some close correlation there when you start looking at some of our governmental officials at the top, but you'll start seeing some of these what they call dark triad personality traits coming out. And you've got psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. How many of you guys know a narcissist? I think we all do, right? How many of you have ever lived with a narcissist? That's okay.
Elizabeth Holmes.
Oh, Elizabeth Holmes, perfect example. Right. So, sociopath, what's interesting with these dark triad personalities is, at the end of the day, all of it, they tie together. There's one core common theme, and it's all about manipulation. Okay? I'm going to read this to you if I can read it from here, because it's very tiny, and I didn't bring my glasses. So, a psychopathy is a neuropsychiatric disorder. That's why I wanted to read this, so I didn't mess that word up. Marked by a deficient emotional response and lack of empathy, commonly resulting in persistent antisocial deviance and criminal behavior. Okay? Machiavellianism is a personality trait that denotes cunningness, the ability to manipulate, and more or less to drive to get whatever they want from someone. They're going to manipulate that person so that they get what they want out of it at the end of the day. And then a narcissistic personality disorder is a mental health condition in which people have an unreasonably high sense of self. right? They place themselves first at everything. They're the center of attention. They have to be in control of everything. So when you start seeing some of these personality traits coming into play, and we're seeing more and more of it, I've kind of dubbed, pre-COVID, I dubbed the last decade, I said the decade of narcissism, because I've got to say in my entire life, I don't know that I've ever seen so much narcissistic personality coming out in people on mass scales as I have in the last 10 years, which is probably exceeding now into to 23. So when you take these personality types, it makes it really dangerous because you'll get people in your organization that are manipulating, cunning, are sitting here acting as though they have, you know, they are your best friend, they have your best interest at heart, and they're doing all these things behind the scene. They're gaining your trust, okay? And what's worse, especially on the narcissistic side, if they start, is that passive aggressive behavior where they attack, you know, start making you feel like you have to have that person because they are so important, but then on the flip side, then they also start mentally beating you down, right? And this could be both on a personal and business side. And so where they start bullying, intimidating either their coworkers or their bosses, I've even seen that. And so people are afraid to say anything, right? So now they just have complete control to go steal and do whatever they want to do. So this is the dark triad. Anybody ever heard of this before? No? All right, so when we look at personality traits, there's always some characteristics, behavioral red flags to pay attention to, right, when it comes to fraud. And then we're going to get into some case studies because I know this is all kind of black, boring stuff. So pay attention to someone living beyond their means. Well, heck, anybody here not have financial difficulties at some point in our life, right? No, it doesn't all make us criminals or fraudsters, just saying, but pay attention if you have somebody who is complaining about not making enough money, but yet goes out and is spending money all the time, driving that nice Audi, you know, expensive car that they just purchased, and you're wondering, how are they affording that when I only pay them $40,000 a year? Somebody that has an unusual close relationship with vendors or customers. Control issues, unwillingness to share duties. You guys have any employees like that? Well, you guys are pretty low key. Like, we need to get some more coffee going. Pay attention to employees who are irritable, suspicious, or defensive behaviors. Obviously, if you've got a bully in your workplace, not only is that a danger for fraud, but it creates a hostile work environment. You could have a ton of HR-related issues. That's never good. And somebody that's got divorce or family problems, because that is probably one of the hardest things people can go through. And I've seen really good people doing the litigation support stuff that I do. I work with, I always tell clients, I said I think 20% of my job is also playing psychiatrist or psychologist to try to talk clients off of a ledge why they're having to go through what they do, and I'm okay with that. But you know, it's when you see good people go through divorce, you see the worst in people, unfortunately, through divorce. You know, just because of all the stress. So, all right, what are some other red flags? Because I'm tired of talking. What are some other red flags to pay attention to?
I actually worked at a company where we had somebody in a controller role who had started withdrawing funds, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of your spidey sense. And when your gut tells you something isn't right, ask the next question. Because in this instance, this person was creating invoices and passing them through for payment. And it was like, well, wait a minute, what did they do for us? I don't remember that. That doesn't track. And so you have to ask those questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everybody hear that? Okay, stop dismissing your gut. I'm telling you right now, don't do it. Every time you do, you're going to end up regretting it. So exactly what Rose says, so make sure you listen to your gut instinct. Excuse me.
They never want to take vacation. because they want control.
Absolutely. You guys remember the Rita Cromwell story? Remember Rita? With no, you guys didn't hear about Dixon, Illinois? This was probably, what, 10, 12, 13 years ago? She had all the thoroughbred horses, right? Embezzled $53 million from little podunk town, Dixon, Illinois. Well, she did take vacations, and that's how they found her. Okay, they found the fraud. They identified a bank statement in the P.O. box that they had gone to pick up and realized that she had opened up a bank statement, a bank account that the city didn't know about and was funneling all her fraud through it.
I worked in banking, and there was procedure to do audits of the entire bank. And I was in a new bank at that location, but the prior manager there never did any of the full-blown audits. So the first thing I did, I came in and did a full audit. And I found that there was $58,000 that wasn't accounted for.
Wow.
And the person that was responsible for that had just left on vacation for 2 weeks.
Had just left. There you go. We'll see. Make sure people go on vacation.
Follow the rules is what I'm getting.
And follow the rules. Yes, good point. All right. So some other red flags to pay attention to. Addiction problems. We talked about pay already. Secretive, usually good at lying. Excessive pressure within the organization, refusal to take vacation. I think that was a common theme. And that is a big one, guys. Someone also, this is another big one, someone that doesn't want their supervisors in their workspace. I get it. Sometimes, it could be, granted, they may not be stealing. It could just be because they're not doing their job. I've seen that too. But still, it's a red flag. Pay attention to it. And we certainly talked about the individual as the most trusted employee. So 85% of fraudsters display at least one behavioral red flag, okay? Again, like Rose said, pay attention. If you see it, don't dismiss it. Now, don't jump and say, hey, Ed, I know you're stealing. Don't do that. That'll get you sued. And you're calling Pulcinelli or Carmen and McDonald to help get you out of it, right? But what you do want to do is you want to start paying attention and maybe start doing a little extra double checking, auditing of paperwork, things of that nature. You'd be surprised at what could come up. All right, so the fun stuff. You guys ready to get into a couple of case studies? How much time do I got? All right, so the bogus bank statements. So this is a case I worked recently. It's a nonprofit organization who worked with disabled, for lack of a better term, they were just Down syndrome folks. And they would come in and they would provide a service for companies. They did a really great job. It was a phenomenal organization. Organization only had an annual budget of $800,000. They didn't have a lot of money, okay? But they did a lot of great work. So I'm going to give you some background. And by the way, this case is actually still being, this employee was indicted. We're still going through the court system. So Lucy is not really Lucy, but for sake of anonymity, I am changing the name. So Lucy is 38 years old, married with 3 children, separated from her husband. She was hired in 2014 as a bookkeeper for a nonprofit, okay? Promoted to general manager in 16, making $24,000 a year. Not a lot of money, right? She was very controlling. She would only show the board Excel spreadsheets that she had prepared and not actual QuickBooks statements, financial statements that would come out of the accounting software. Some of the information that I received in doing the interviews with a couple of the board members and some other employees is Lucy had a huge propensity to spend. Okay, you would see Amazon boxes at her house all the time. People would drive by. It was a small community. This is not in St. Louis. It's in very rural Missouri. And so everybody knew everybody's business. The board had noticed $90,000 in charges coming out of the bank account that were going to a credit card they didn't know about. Okay. So the summary of the fraud. Here's what happened. So as I get in, I do the investigation, we identified that Lucy had opened up a PayPal account in the organization's name, but she controlled the account. So the organization, when we tried to get the funds, it took us a lot of hurdles to jump to actually be able to go through and get the information so we could figure out what money was in that account, what got transferred to it. She transferred $41,000 out of the bank accounts to this PayPal account, which she then would pull out for her own personal use. She wrote 4 checks. This one still baffles me. Why would you only write 4 checks? Why not 5? Why not 14? You know, but 4. She wrote 4 checks, totaling $4,200 to herself. She made over 200 unauthorized purchases using the company's bank accounts for things like Amazon, Airbnb. She paid her credit card. $90,000 was her credit card payments that she had paid, and other miscellaneous purchases. She gave herself an unauthorized pay raise of $134,000. So Lucy, how she concealed this fraud, okay? And I'll tell you what, folks, if you've got this much time on your hands, then we're all doing something wrong. She took the bank statements, she got them, downloaded them from the bank, she had PDFs, and she went and altered the PDFs so that it was only showing what she wanted to show to board. Then she gave that to the accountant, the external accountant who did the bank reconciliation, and the accountant said, no, everything tied out. So then that means she had to go through the accounting software and delete or didn't enter transactions in. Can you imagine the amount of time and effort it took to do that? Her fraud loss was $358,729 over a 6-year period. Okay, a little more than your $200,000 that I had given you earlier in that quote. Obviously, this case was referred for prosecution, and she was indicted, and as I said, now the case is pending the court system right now. So, what do you think contributed to Lucy's unethical behavior?
Living a larger lifestyle than she actually had or earned.
Living a larger lifestyle, good. What, in the back? You, ma'am, with the blonde? Nope. Okay.
It started with that she was scared because she was separated from her husband. She had 3 small kids. She's a young mom, and she's not sure what's going to happen. She's separated, not sure she's going to get it. Second of all, she felt she wasn't getting paid as much as what she was worth because she was only making $24,000.
Okay, all right, pay.
So she started down that path, and then was the first thing that $4,200 that she was paying herself 4 times, that was probably a quarterly bonus that she paid herself.
I like how he's got this all figured out. You want a job?
I sell crime insurance.
Oh. Good, we're going to put him on the spot later too. Go ahead, keep going, you're doing good.
And then it just spiraled out.
Yeah, yeah. So, exactly. You know, she's living outside her means, but she's got some financial pressures probably from home. But what I didn't hear you say is, where'd the greed kick in?
But she didn't get caught. She was doing it for 6 years.
And it became so easy.
Right.
Well, so I interviewed her, did a phone interview with her, right? Let's just say the narcissism came through very loud and clear. Okay? So there was definitely an element of that. So we talked about the red flags already, I think. Well, actually, what were some other red flags? There's a few others.
Can I say something?
Yep.
I find odd that you do an audit and you're getting your statements from the person you're auditing.
Thank you. Did everybody hear that? She said she finds it odd that when you send the bank statements to the CPA, that you're getting them from the person that you're actually auditing. And that's correct. You should be getting, the accountants, whoever's doing a bank rec, should be getting them directly from the source, right? If they do get them, well, more times than not, they end up getting them from the party, but I always recommend get them from the source if you can download them, or get them from not the person who's responsible for the accounting, like have the statements go to the owner's house and then get them from the owner. Yeah, Mike?
So, a couple things. So first of all, she sent
Here, I don't know if they can hear you.
They gave the bank statements to CPA. He was doing their books. He wasn't necessarily doing an audit. So there might have been an expectation that he was doing something that he wasn't. So if all he was doing was taking those numbers and putting them into the form of a financial statement, that's not an audit.
No, they were just doing bank recs.
He was just doing bank recs.
Just bank recs.
But to that point, the internal control, what is that bank rec? We recommend to all our clients that the owners receive the bank statements correctly and they review them. Whether they do or they don't, that's their call. But the reality is the bookkeeper or the accountant may or may not know whether the owner is actually doing it or not. So that could be a reason why they might think there is internal control.
Right. So, good deal. Good seeing you, Craig.
The packages is one I was thinking about. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Packages?
The packages?
Yes, somebody had to notice that she was getting a lot of stuff.
Well, in some cases, she actually had it delivered to the facility, too.
That's what I was thinking.
So, yeah.
I'm just curious, when you interview people, do you ever ask, like, the first time you did it, if it had been discovered right away, had you already made up a strategy for how you're going to explain it away?
Well, we talk a lot about why they do what they do, so I'll ask questions similar to what you're saying, maybe not directly that way, but yeah, and I always ask, when was the first time you started doing this? You know, when was the last time? Well, you know, we kind of, because the more I can understand the mindset, then I can be a better, more effective interviewer to get into their head and use some of that against them to get them to tell me the rest of the things they don't want to, if that makes sense. So, all right. So how could the fraud have been prevented? Transparency.
At every stage.
Yeah. You know, the biggest thing for me is, as I told the board, I said, hey gang, first off, require that whoever's giving you financials, that they should come directly from QuickBooks. The treasurer should be, they don't have to be an expert at QuickBooks, but at least go in and review things periodically. The accountant, you know, the external accountant was looking at it. You know, there's audit trail functions in QuickBooks that you can show that, you know, deleted transactions. I always go and look for deleted transactions, voided transactions. Just little things just to do a quick spot check. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's also making sure that there's some segregation of duties where somebody was, if they couldn't, because it was a very small organization, so I said, no, the segregation was a little bit challenging to have to be able to do when you don't have the staffing, the manpower. However, the treasurer was there, they had board members there, they should have been looking at some things and just doing some of their own audits. You know, take 10, I always tell owners, take 10, 15 minutes and go spot check the bank statements. Go look at the bank statements, get your check images. Look to see, are there other check payments being made to employees, you know? And if you're not getting the check images on your bank statements, pay the extra stinking $5 and get them on there. I'm telling you, because that's where you're gonna find people who are committing fraud. Take time and look at the payroll ledgers, look at your expenses, you know, your credit card statements, see if people are, just go through and do a quick review. You don't have to spend a ton of time, but that little bit of time that you invest will pay dividends. All right, this is a fun one. The granny caper, you like these names? Yeah. Wait till you see the next one. All right, the granny caper. Anybody recognize this lady? Her name is Carol Dotson, real name. She has been convicted and spent 3 years in the federal pen. Last name Dotson, anybody familiar? Anybody in the city? St. Louis? Former chief of police? Yeah. This is his mother. Oh wow, yeah. So Carol Dotson, she, I had gotten called in after the FBI had already gotten this case. And so we had gone through, she worked for a property management company. She was 70 years old, she worked there for over 20 years. She was responsible, obviously, for all the accounting functions, okay, including, which the owner, because they were older, old school, okay, didn't believe in technology, so the owner wanted to see all of the payments that they made, that she made, on an Excel spreadsheet. That's how he tracked it. Okay, I cringed when I heard that, just saying. And they also had a signature stamp, so Carol made a lot of use of that signature stamp. She was very trusted by the family. Carol, when I do these investigations, I always go do asset searches. I want to see what assets is somebody buying. I was trying to understand if they just embezzled $358,000, what did they do with it? Did they spend it? Did they buy things? Did they, put it up their nose because they've got a drug issue? What do they do with it? Are they gambling it away? So I always do an asset investigation. Carol had 2 houses. Both were paid off. Now, granted, she's 70, so okay, but looked like they weren't, the houses weren't, she didn't have the houses for 30 years, let's just put it that way, okay? So, they were paid off quickly. Her daughter had a drug issue, so she had a tendency to pay for all of the daughter's bills and financial issues that came up and criminal issues. And what was interesting, and the other part to this is, I also did an asset search on Chief Dotson, since there was a family connection, and I found that he also had 2 houses, which I found odd, because you have to wonder how the chief of police could afford that on that salary at this time. And obviously we didn't pursue that, but because he had already left I think St. Louis and moved on to another state working for another company. So here's the key. Carol was a convicted bank felon back in the 80s. Nobody did a background check. So over 14 years, here's what Carol did. She wrote herself large checks, and I do mean large checks, okay? She paid for her mother's elder care, mortgage payments, home renovations, cleaning services, legal services, shopping, and obviously her daughter's activities. The investigation revealed, I did some interviews. This is what was funny, because we're trying to figure out what did she do with all this money, okay? And I'll get to that here in a second, but the neighbor who I interviewed had made comment that they often saw her out in the backyard digging in the ground. I tried to get the FBI to go do a little excavating. They frowned on that. I don't think they wanted to get their suits dirty. Anyway, so we never did go find any of the proceeds that we believe probably are still there in the backyard. This case was prosecuted for $2.2 million. Now, that's what was prosecuted. What I identified, the loss, was well over $6 million. But the FBI only stopped at 2.2. Okay? So can you imagine? Trust me, I wanted that money in the backyard. My client wanted that money in the backyard. They did end up seizing her houses, so they did some asset seizures, so I know she lost some things. The client got some of their money back, but needless to say, not all of it, or even close. All right. So, red flags. What were the red flags in that case?
The background and history. She was bank fraud.
Well, convicted felon, but they didn't know that.
Total control over writing all the checks.
Total control. I mean, that's it. It really is. It's what it came down to. The owners didn't know what she was doing. She had complete control. Nobody ever audited what she was doing. She had the signature stamp. She didn't even have to forge a signature. She just used a stamp. So, plenty of internal control breakdowns, right? Here's my question. How do you think Carol kept her fraud from her son? Or did he know?
Probably.
Makes you wonder, huh? Yeah.
Willful blindness.
So, I have a hard time thinking that he didn't know about her being a convicted felon in Texas for bank fraud. So, to this day, we'll never know. So that is Carol. Now, next on, living like the Kardashians. I told you you'd like that one. All right. Mike, this is our case. Or your case, I should say. I didn't work this case. This is one that I have some intimate knowledge of from some folks that I know who did either work it or were involved in this. Trey Luna was a 42-year-old married man with children. He was a chief financial officer for a local telecommunications company here in Chesterfield, Missouri. Highly regarded by his employers and coworkers. And he definitely lived a lavish lifestyle, okay? He had a nice home in Chesterfield. He built a lake house in Perryville, Missouri. Took a lot of very extravagant vacations. And here's how Trey perpetrated the fraud. He wrote many of checks to himself, increased his salary, which also, by the way, inflated their 401k match and bonuses, made ACH transfers to pay personal credit cards and invoices related to his new lake house. So the company, in other words, built them a lake house and they didn't know about it. He created fictitious vendors, listed them as consultants for employers, and then these companies obviously never performed any work. That's what we call a shell company, okay, fictitious vendor. He also took partnership disbursements, although he was never a partner. He admitted to stealing $280,000 a year. That's a nice little extra bonus. What do you think, guys? We could go have a lot of fun with that, couldn't we? So during the course of the 10 years, total embezzlement was $2.8 million. That equated to $101.3 million in cash, $40,000 on vacations, $82,000 for vehicles, $93,000 on other business ventures, and nearly $1 million on credit cards. He served 27 months of his 41-month sentence. I'm not sure how he got out early, other than good time. But I will say, that's the one thing that's frustrating as a fraud examiner. When I'm working to deal with financial fraud, if Ed steals, and Ed steals big, or even if Ed doesn't steal big and he gets convicted, it's a slap on the wrist compared to somebody that's going to have an assault or a burglary or something else. Financial fraud, unfortunately, does pay, okay? And that's what's frustrating. And people know that, and that's why they take the risk. I had a case one time, and this was really frustrating. She embezzled $1.2 million from the client and then went and started immediately working for a paint company and decided, because she had gotten called out on her fraud, the owner identified it, and she said, oh, I only took $30,000. Well, no, it was 1.2. Started paying restitution immediately of $500 a week, $2,000 a month. Where do you think she got that money from? Right? Yes. So when a Secret Service, because I always try to take my cases federal. I try to avoid state charges because they're a joke. So I try to take cases federal. So I had Secret Service working on that case, and I asked the agent, I said, will you do me a favor, just can you go to the paint place and pick her up, please? Because I can't, as a fraud examiner, under my code of conduct, I cannot notify the other company that this person is doing this. But the federal agent can, So one last piece on Troy's case. So this is what was interesting. The company sued the wife and the in-laws for this house in Perryville, saying that they should have known that these funds were coming from ill-gotten gains, right, from illegal funds. The jury found that the, I guess, in-laws had no knowledge, but the wife should have known, and they fined her, there was a judgment against her for $177,000 that she had to pay back to the company. So I thought that was interesting. Mike, do you have anything to add to this since you're more intimate with this case?
Just for I worked with the company and its attorneys on the civil litigation after he'd already gotten out of jail. So I was involved in the original investigation or trying to determine how much he'd stolen. That was already had been determined. It was where did the money go and how to try to recover some of it. But a couple of things. Number one of the things he did do was he opened credit cards in the company's name. The company didn't know about. He charged me they would pay for those, and that's where a lot of the money went to. The way that the fraud was uncovered was that the 401k match that you mentioned.
So I think the owner's wife was doing the payroll. He might have been on vacation that week. She noticed that his match looked just odd, and it was like $27 different than what she expected it to be. She looked at the payroll and said, well, we don't, and it showed a higher wage. They realized that wasn't what they had authorized to pay him. When he got back from vacation, they confronted him. He said, yeah, you're right. I am paying myself more than I'm supposed to, and it just unraveled from there. And at first he said, well, that's all I'm doing. Of course, that's never what it is. It just it was a snowball that kept rolling.
Right.
The interesting thing was this guy worked for the CPA firm that used to serve this company. And when he was hired on as CFO, one of the first things he did was told the company, now that I'm working for you, you don't need an audit anymore.
Red flag.
There you go.
Yeah, so great. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, that last piece is interesting. That would definitely be a red flag. So given Trey's position as CFO, could the internal controls have been prevented or to detect, would internal controls even have helped if he's in charge of everything? Yeah? Okay. They still should, something should still, there should still be some level of internal control, and hopefully the employees under him feel empowered to come forward. I think that's where we see a lot of challenges when it comes to dealing with the CFO, because I hear too many times from the underlings that they weren't comfortable coming forward. They didn't want to call out their boss. They didn't want to lose their job. And that's why a lot of times these CFOs continue to get away with so much fraud. So was Trey's actions need or greed? What do you think? Greed, definitely. So what level on that dark triad triangular circle would you say he fell on? Probably a few other things, maybe a little Machiavellianism. Yeah. So, all right. So that is Trey Luna. So, living like the Kardashians, like that, huh?
Question, Jackie. How many cases do you see actually prosecuted? And at what threshold do you see more cases not taken to that level?
Well, so the cases I work all get prosecuted. That's one of the things, well, let me rephrase that. I'd say 99% of the time they're prosecuted. If we identify that somebody was embezzling. The rare occasion that it's not is usually because I have a client, I'll be honest, any doctors in here? Okay. Doctors are the worst, and I'll tell that to their face. Okay? They'll call me and say I have an employee stealing, and we'll identify that the person was stealing $100,000, and I'm like, okay, do you want to prosecute? Well, no. And then they continue to let the employee work there, and they think she's going to pay it back. I can't tell you, every time I get a call from a medical practice or a doctor, I'm like, okay, here we go. I know where this is going. It's rare that they're prosecuting. So a lot of times I find that I try to I'm not needed. I talk myself out of being hired at that point. Because, if you're not, why spend the money on me if you're not going to do anything with it? Unless you need it for insurance purposes, which we'll get to here in a second. Okay. But now, on the flip side, I think there's a lot that go undetected, right? Or when I say undetected, from studies and surveys and things, because I don't think a lot of companies call professionals. They might call their attorney, and the attorney says, I'll just fire him, let him go, right? Let's keep it hush hush, because they don't want the exposure, they don't want the PR, they don't want any bad things, to come back on them, or they're afraid of an employment claim, what have you. So, and that's unfortunate, because that's what we were talking about with that 87% doesn't have any type of criminal history. Well, more times than not, a lot of these folks, and this is the other thing I would say, if somebody comes in and starts stealing right out of the gate, they've done it before. That's not their first rodeo, folks, I'm here to tell you, okay? If they come in and they haven't stolen right out of the gate, and it might take a couple of years, that could be that person's trying to, something happened over time, and it's not part of who they are. But if they steal right away, they've done it before, Okay? Guarantee they probably have just gone from one employer to the next, haven't been caught, haven't been prosecuted, and now it's somebody else's problem. I saw a hand. No? Okay. All right, so if a fraud happens to you, what do you do? I'm going to wrap up here. What do you do? Who do you call?
Jackie.
No, I did not pay him to say that, I promise. Call your attorney. That should be your first call. Okay, talk to your attorney. Let your attorney know what's going on legally. Now, here's what I will say. If you have a fraud situation, a lot of times the attorney will say, just terminate them. If you're going to investigate, I would prefer that you suspend them pending the investigation and not terminate, because then it gives somebody like me or Mike or whoever comes in to do an investigation the opportunity to actually sit down and interview that person. Okay? So keep that in mind. Document. Make sure you get all your ducks in a row. That's really important. If you can get them, if they come in and they say they did steal, even if it's 30, they only admit to 30,000, have them write it down. Put a date, their name, have them go through and say exactly what they did, how they did it, and sign it. Okay? Get a written statement. That's really important. So, how do you recover the fraud losses if you have a fraud? Can you? Well, first off, first question I ask.
Transfer the risk.
Well, I don't ask that question because that sounds like an insurance person saying it. I don't ask that question.
Do you have insurance coverage for it?
That's the first question I ask.
The things that we do is, talk about it, but going back to that, we always hear it's not going to happen. We trust these people, the family, but people who are stealing from you are unfortunately can be family.
Right. Yep. Family will steal from family, by the way. So just keep that in mind. But I always ask when somebody calls, do you have insurance coverage? If so, what are your limits? Okay? Because and do those limits cover hiring a forensic expert to come in and pay for it? Because sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So.
And it's what's in your policy currently. I mean, you look at it, it's going to be minimal unless you increase it. Get a management liability policy, directors and officers. You have crime coverage. You get.
See, now you're steering them away from getting all the insurance.
$1 million, seriously. I mean, it doesn't cost that much when you look at it.
It doesn't. No, not when it comes to these type of losses.
What it does is it's in the time of discovery also, because this could be going on for 6, 7, 8 years, and $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, you might not catch it, but over 3 years, it's going to get up to $100,000.
Right. So make sure you talk to Richard about employee crime policy when we're done. I would recommend getting at least 5% of your revenues, since we know 5% is going to go out to fraud, right? Make sure you're covered adequately. You also can look at civil, filing a lawsuit, okay? But you have to weigh if I'm going to sue somebody, because you can sometimes make more money suing them going after garnishments, bank garnishments, employment garnishments, than you will restitution through the courts. If you prosecute, the courts generally will, require some level of restitution, but good luck trying. I mean, we're talking pennies. Sometimes the civil side, you might, if you know somebody's got assets, then you might be able to go after that a little bit more. So you've got criminal, civil, and then look at your insurance. That's the best way. Insurance is the number one. Make sure you guys are covered. And if you're not, shame on you, because when the time comes, not if, okay, you're going to wish you had it. Okay? So keep in mind, fraud is committed by people that you trust, okay? And I always say trust but verify. And so in final thought, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path, right? So make sure you walk the path. Lead by example, set the tone at the top. Make sure that others in your organization know that what your expectations are, okay? And that fraud is not to be tolerated. All right? Any questions?
Jackie, most internal controls are built to stop one person committing fraud. How do you find that you've got two people internally that's working together?
And we're seeing more and more of that. So Keith's question was, if you have two people working together to commit the fraud, how do you stop that? All it takes is that one somebody coming forward and saying, hey, something doesn't feel right, and we start looking, right? So if it's one person, 3 people, 5 people, however many, I mean, you can usually start, once you start investigating, you can start ferreting that out. I actually have a case now where I've got some corruption type schemes going on, where we're going after one target, right? The doctor in this case was embezzling money from his doctor partner, and I wasn't focused on anybody else but him, and then all of a sudden, in getting his bank records, I found that he was then giving kickbacks to the office manager, because he was taking checks out of the mail before they ever got deposited, and depositing them into his account, totaling over $1.3 million. And so I started identifying that now we've got a second party who was actually getting a kickback of 10% when I did the analysis on average, and she was getting some money on the side for letting him do his deed. So, I mean, internal controls at the end of the day, it's a human element. It goes back to that. If people aren't going to do their jobs, you're going to have an internal control breakdown, even if you have the best internal control systems out there. If you've got one person or 2 people stealing, it's the same thing. You're still going to investigate, and you'll be able to identify it just through, everybody leaves a paper trail. It's always there. You just have to know where to look.
Are there trends where companies that tend to pay their employees better avoid fraud, or is it irrelevant?
You know what I would say? It's not necessarily about the pay, it's about the company culture. So a company that has a really strong culture, people are going to have a harder time rationalizing stealing from them. So that's what I would say.
What was the brand loss Asking on behalf of
Got it, okay. One more question, and then I'm going to, because I know I'm over, so I apologize, and then I'll hang out if people have other questions. Go ahead, sir.
So say I suspect somebody's stealing from my company, I call you. What's the lead time between you, like, looking at my books and then investigating the suspect?
The answer is it depends on when you call. If I'm going to trial, that moment.
Like days, weeks, months?
Yeah, no. So what I say is, to start the investigation, I always get in and try to at least get things going, right? Especially if it's an employee fraud, because I try to make those a priority if I don't have a trial coming up on the litigation side. However, I always tell folks, plan a good 6 months for an investigation to take place. Sometimes longer if law enforcement gets involved. So, all right. I apologize for running a few minutes over. Hopefully this was informative, informational. Thank you guys for allowing me to come in and get the cobwebs out for getting back into live presentation mode here.
Nice job.
Thank you.
So much.
All right, how about another round of applause? All right, I'm going to get everything fired back up here. Okay, so thank you very much. That was awesome. Incredible stories. I did see some of the expressions around the room, and I saw a lot of this.
Thank you.
So, good stuff. All right, so Jace, if you could come up and we're going to get a picture of everybody. So the standing joke here is, this is going to go on social media, standing joke is if you're a felon or a fraudster and you don't want your picture on social media, just duck your head. Everybody smile for Jason.
Thank you.
Awesome, thanks Jace. Okay, so our next event is May 12th. We're going to be back here. On the website you'll notice that it says that it's a manufacturing only event. We are in the process of discussing possibly also having a separate networking event there so that we get all of the people that come for the networking involved. So more to come on that, but keep an eye out. There may be 2 registration links that is going on. We have to flesh that whole thing out. It'll be the first time that we do it, but keep an eye out for that. And then there are feedback forms on your tables. If you could fill those out, please. Those are really important to us to let us know what you want to hear about, what you thought of the event, what you thought of the presentation, everything along those lines. And then there are trash cans and recycle bins at the exits. If you could take your trash and recycle or throw it away, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again. Hopefully we are through some of the rain, but I think there's some more to come. We hope you all have a great weekend, and we really appreciate you being here. Thanks. Take care.